It's a strange one, Jubilee. I mean, as I say, it's the one which got me onto the TV show. And of course, very, very quickly after it was written. I mean, Jubilee was written late 2002. And by the end of 2003, I was asked to do Russell's TV show. So it was only a year later. So it was,
how did that come about? How did you go from writing Jubilee to TV show? What was it that Russell wanted or saw in it?
I'm not entirely sure, because we never really discussed it much. I'd never met Russell. I heard, the way we all did, about the show coming back in September, I want to think, 2003-ish. It was around that sort of time. And I was so excited because I'm a Doctor Who fan. And people said to me, "You think you'll be on it?" And I said, "Not a chance, because I'm not a very experienced TV writer." I mean, basically, it was being sacked off Born and Bred with Chris Chibnall that was my big TV claim to fame, because I didn't do very well on that show. And then my agent gave me a call one day and said, "Russell T Davies has phoned up," or the production team anyway, maybe it was Julie, "and they'd like to invite you to write episode 6 of the new series." And I said, "What, you mean?" And they want to interview me. I said, no, you're being offered episode 6, and they want it to be a Dalek story. And do you want to say yes? And I said, yes. She said, because you had said that because I had said to my agent before that after Born and Bred, I wanted to move into trying to do my own shows rather than working on other people's. So she hadn't accepted the job for me. And I said, "No, you got to call them back." And of course I'll do it. And of course, they were out. And so it became this sort of rather panicky thing that even going along to my first meeting at the BBC, I entered the room and I thought that Russell would take one look at me and said, "Oh, no, I didn't want you." Because why would he? But we sat down and he said he'd really enjoyed Jubilee and we'd like to do a Dalek story. And then they showed me some pictures of Daleks on a TV screen, some animation. I said, "We can do this and you're doing it." And they all laughed and I laughed. I thought it was incredible. We're bringing back Doctor Who and I'm doing the Daleks. And I said, "So what do you want from Jubilee? I mean, do you want Jubilee?" And Russell said, "No, I don't really." And he said, "I quite like some of the ideas. I like that Dalek juice, that you boil a Dalek." And I said, "Yeah, that's not going to work." Though he said, "No, that's not going to work either." And so we came up in that meeting with the idea that he really liked the idea of a companion having a relationship with the Dalek, with this single Dalek. But unlike with Jubilee, where it was all very Silence of the Lambs, where Evelyn spends a good, hour and a half effectively having conversations with the Dalek, we couldn't afford the time for that on TV. So it was going to be something much more simple, like Rose touching it. And that would be the sort of connecting point, and that'd be much more visual, which meant, we were discussing things like DNA transfer. It was all very strange. And I kept on thinking all the time I was in the meeting, I thought, this isn't, they don't really want me to do this, do they? And I spent the next few months constantly assuming they were going to give me a call and say, "We've been thinking about this and we would really rather have somebody else." But they never did. And it actually went out. I mean, I was shocked, really. But we realised very, very quickly that although Jubilee had been what Russell had listened to and had got excited by, it wasn't going to fit. I mean, mostly because Jubilee is specifically a story about what happens if you know the Daleks too well. It's all about basically us as fans not taking the threat seriously anymore. It's like the Nazis in Indiana Jones films, whereas the whole point of the audience for Dalek was going to be an audience who may never know what a Dalek was. We were trying to reach those 8-year-old kids who had never seen it. And so it was a completely, it was the complete reversal of Jubilee. So there wasn't an awful lot we could really take from it. And it's really only that one scene. And when I heard that back when I was doing the novelization, the scene where Colin Baker meets the Dalek in the cell, it's nothing. It's nothing at all compared to the Chris Eccleston one. because that became such an important scene for us in the TV, whereas it was just basically a getting out of a cliffhanger, because it wasn't.
I mean, it's a Dalek. It's a Dalek locked up, a Dalek being tortured, about a companion showing compassion. I think there's probably more to it than you're giving it credit for.
I mean, it's. I think it's a tonal thing, as I say. I mean, I was hoping I could. I mean, when I agreed to do the novelisation for Target, I thought, well, I can pad it out really by sticking in bits of Jubilee, but it's so tonally wrong for what Dalek is. I mean, it's weird. I mean, people, a lot of fans, very kindly, I think, knowing that Dalek was a longer, more collaborative effort, will tell me that they far prefer Jubilee. And I think, well, that's kind, but I think Dalek is rather better than Jubilee. I think it's leaner. I mean, I prefer some of the ideas in Jubilee a bit. I mean, I love the craziness of Jubilee sometimes, but I did think at that stage, if I was doing Doctor Who at that point, I was a little bit expansive with my craziness. I think Jubilee is where I just go a bit too far. Although I do love bits. I mean, I think the opening credits, I remember writing that, having such fun writing the stuff that was to go between the episodes, only one of which actually made the cut because it was too long. But that opening bit where we have the Dalek movie, that was fun. I enjoyed that a lot.
All the extras are there. They're sitting on a special release somewhere. I think it's a Big Finish magazine, or I know you can find them all because they're all around. Dalek to me is actually still one of the best structured. I mean, it showed the structure of what the new series could do, and once again, hugely successful, and top of lots of people's lists in terms of the best since the show's come back. Shows that come back.
It's really nice.
Why? I know it had a very troubled history in terms of lots of redrafts, losing the Daleks coming back, etc., etc. So I know it's a very painful process to write and work on.
No, it was fine, actually. I mean, it gets overstaged. I think possibly because stupidly at the time, I was so tired that I kind of told people how long it had taken. But actually, that was fair. I mean, we all went through it. I mean, that was standard. It was to do with the fact also that you're on the first series, and we had a longer gestation period than most series would have. So what happens with scripts is that you kind of work to fill the time you've got. So if suddenly someone, like with the Big Finish stuff, if someone contacts you and says, we need Chums at midnight, and you've got 2 weeks, you spend 2 weeks writing it. If someone comes to you and they say in 2003, we're doing a new Doctor Who series and it won't be filming probably until this time next year, then you have a year. And what you do in that year is you write it, and then they say, that's great, let's do it again and again, because that's the point. You're still on the show, and there's always something that can be done until they start filming. So I think, every script went through the same process, except probably Stephen's, because Stephen was writing the final series of Coupling and didn't come on and join us on the show until a bit later. But certainly Mark and Paul, we were just doing lots of rewrites because there was time for them, and we were trying to make them as good as possible. My problem mostly really was that we did temporarily lose the Daleks somewhere around draft 5, getting the phone call and telling me that we didn't have the rights to them, so we'd have to rethink the story without Daleks in it. That was a bit of a shock, but it was only about a month where we had that problem, and I went away and I wrote effectively a version of the script. I wanted to do a completely different story for a while, but quite rightly, Russell wasn't keen on that. He said, well, you can just salvage it, and he gave me a new monster to work with, which was the
Toclafane.
At that point, unnamed Toclafane. Which was all Russell's idea. He just said, and what we'll do is we'll reveal in the series finale that they are the future Earth people. But in my story, therefore, all I had was basically the Doctor meeting this sort of big floating ball. And he's knowing that had caused the Time War and had killed all the Time Lords, but having never known what they were. And at the end of my story, I wrote it so that the ball died giggling, still refusing to tell him what it was that it actually was. And it was fine, but to be honest, it wasn't that good. I mean, I don't think it would have been that fondly thought of if it hadn't been for a Dalek in it. So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't too painful. It was just a long experience, but that's the nature of TV.